She walked away from the courthouse with slow, measured steps, as if the ground itself might crack if she moved too fast. The papers were still warm in her hands, the ink barely dry, yet they felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. Around her, the city continued as if nothing had changed, cars honking, people laughing, vendors shouting, but her world had ended quietly inside a beige courtroom where 15 years of marriage were reduced to a few signatures and a judge's tired voice. Aisha did not cry. She had cried enough in the months leading up to this day, late at night when the walls of her home seemed to close in, early in the morning when she still reached for a man who no longer belonged to her, and silently during arguments where she begged to be seen and heard. By the time the divorce was final, her tears were gone. What remained was a hollow calm, the kind that comes after a storm has already destroyed everything in its path. She had no house to return to. The apartment they once shared had been awarded to her ex-husband, along with most of what they owned. He was successful, well-connected, and convincing in court. She was emotionally unstable, according to his lawyer, a phrase that still echoed in her mind. All she left with was a single suitcase, her old phone, and a modest amount of money that wouldn't last more than a few weeks. She chose not to call anyone. Pride, stubbornness, or maybe exhaustion kept her from reaching out. Her parents had passed years ago, and her siblings lived far away with families of their own. She didn't want pity. She didn't want explanations. She wanted distance, space to breathe, to think, to remember who she was before she became someone's wife and then someone's failure. That night, she stayed in a small, dimly lit guesthouse near the bus station. The bed creaked every time she moved, and the walls were thin enough that she could hear strangers coughing and whispering through the night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly above her, slicing the air with a dull hum. For the first time in years, there was no one beside her, no one to adjust the blanket, no one to turn off the light. The loneliness pressed against her chest, heavy and unrelenting. In the morning, she stood in front of the cracked mirror in the bathroom and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired, her face thinner than she remembered, her hair pulled back in a careless knot. But beneath the exhaustion, she saw something else, a quiet determination that had survived everything. She straightened her shoulders and whispered to herself that she would not disappear. Not now. Not ever. Aisha had worked before marriage, briefly, but years of sacrificing her career for her husband's ambitions had left gaps in her resume that employers didn't look kindly upon. Still, she tried. She printed copies of her CV at a small shop and spent days walking from office to office, store to store, asking for work. Polite smiles turned into polite rejections. Some didn't even bother to hide their disinterest when they learned how long she'd been out of the workforce. Each rejection chipped away at her confidence, but she kept going. By the end of the second week, her savings were nearly gone. She skipped meals to make the money last longer, convincing herself she wasn't hungry anyway. At night, she returned to the guesthouse with aching feet and a pounding head, collapsing onto the bed as if it were the only safe place left in the world. On the 17th day, the guesthouse owner gently informed her that her time was up unless she could pay in advance. Aisha nodded, thanked her, and packed her suitcase. She stepped out onto the street with nowhere to go, the city suddenly feeling too big, too loud, too indifferent. She spent that afternoon sitting on a bench in a quiet neighborhood she had wandered into by accident. The houses there were larger, the streets cleaner, lined with trees that cast long shadows in the late sunlight. She watched people come and go, drivers opening doors for well-dressed women, gardeners trimming hedges, delivery trucks pulling up to tall iron gates. It felt like a different world, one she had no place in. As the sun dipped lower, panic began to rise in her chest. She needed shelter. She needed work. Something, anything, to hold on to. Her eyes fell on a small notice pinned to a community board near the bench. It was simple, handwritten. Live-in caretaker needed. Experience preferred. There was an address at the bottom, not far from where she sat. She stared at the note for a long time, weighing her options. She had nothing to lose. Gathering what little courage she had left, she stood up, smoothed her clothes, and followed the address down a quiet road that curved gently uphill. The house stood at the end of the street, partially hidden behind tall gates and flowering bushes. It wasn't the largest mansion she had seen in that neighborhood, but there was something about it, an understated elegance, a sense of calm. The gate was unlocked. She hesitated, her heart pounding, then stepped inside and walked up the stone path toward the front door. For a moment, she considered turning back. Who was she kidding? A divorced woman with no references, no connections, and a suitcase full of worn clothes. But before she could retreat, the door opened. A man stood there, tall and composed, dressed casually but unmistakably expensive. His hair was touched with gray at the temples, his posture relaxed yet commanding. When his eyes met hers, they softened, not with judgment or suspicion, but with curiosity. He smiled. It wasn't the polite, dismissive smile she had grown used to. It was genuine, warm, as if he had been expecting her. Yes, he said gently. Aisha swallowed, suddenly aware of how dry her throat was. I saw the notice, she managed. About the caretaker position. The man studied her for a brief moment, then opened the door wider. Please, he said, stepping aside. Come in. She crossed the threshold, feeling as though she were stepping into another life. The interior was spacious but not cold, filled with light and the subtle scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. There were no extravagant displays of wealth, no gold-plated decorations, just quiet luxury and comfort. I'm Daniel, the man said as he closed the door behind her. Would you like some tea? She nodded, unsure if her voice would cooperate. They sat across from each other in a sunlit sitting room, a small table between them. As he poured the tea, she noticed his hands, steady, confident, the hands of someone who had built something with his life. He listened as she spoke. She didn't tell him everything, only that she was looking for work, that she was responsible and willing to learn, that she needed a chance. She didn't mention the divorce until he asked, and even then, she spoke of it plainly, without bitterness. When she finished, she braced herself for rejection. Instead, Daniel leaned back slightly, his eyes thoughtful. You know, he said slowly, most people who come here are very good at telling me what they think I want to hear. He met her gaze. You didn't. She wasn't sure how to respond. I need someone honest, he continued. Someone who understands loss, responsibility, and resilience. This house doesn't need much care, but I do. Her breath caught. Are you saying? I'm saying, he said with a small smile, that if you'd like the position, it's yours. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Aisha felt a warmth spread through her chest, followed by an overwhelming urge to cry. She pressed her lips together, fighting the tears. Thank you, she whispered. I won't disappoint you. I don't think you will, Daniel replied. That night, she lay in a clean, comfortable room with a real bed, soft sheets, and a window that looked out onto the garden. The silence was peaceful, not empty. As she closed her eyes, she realized something had shifted, not just her circumstances but her sense of self. She didn't know who Daniel really was yet. She didn't know that his name appeared on business magazines, that his net worth was discussed in whispers, that people bowed their heads when he entered a room. All she knew was that a stranger had opened a door when the world had closed every other one. And somewhere deep inside her, hope, small but stubborn, began to breathe again.